"Take hold of this rope," said the first soldier, "and climb out from your pit, slut. Your presence is requested in another far deeper hellhole." Grignr slipped his right hand to his thigh, concealing a small, opaque object beneath the folds of the G-string wrapped about his waist. Knew he was a stripper. Brine wells swelled in Grignr's cold, jade-squinting eyes, which, grown accustomed to the gloom of the Stygian pools of ebony engulfing him, were bedazzled and blinded by flickering, spelled wrong, radiance cast forth by the second soldier's resin torch. Tightly gripped in the second soldier's right hand, opposite the intermittent torch, was a large, double-edged axe, a long, leather-wound, oaken-handled, transfixing the center of the weapon's iron head. Adorning the torsos of both of the sentries were thin yet sturdy hauberks, the breastplates. I think you meant breastplates, of which were woven of tightly hemmed twines of reinforced silver braiding. Cupping the soldiers' feet were thick leather sandals, wound about their shins to 2 inches below their knees. This is all good to know. Wrapped about their waists were wide satin girdles, with slender bladed poniards dangling loosely from them, the hilts of which featured scarlet-encrusted gems. Resting upon the manes of their heads, and reaching midway to their brows, were smooth copper morions. Morions? Spiraling the lower portion of the helmet were short, up-curved silver spikes, while a golden hump spired from the top of each bassinet. Beneath their chins, wound around their necks and draping their clad shoulders, dangled regal purple satin cloaks, which flowed midway to the soldiers' feet. Why do we need to know this? Hand over hand, feet braced against the dank walls of the enclosure, huge Grignr ascended from the moldering depths of the forlorn abyss. His swelled limbs, stiff due to the boredom of a timeless inactivity, compounded by the musty atmosphere. Did you mean atmosphere? And jagged granite protuberance against his body, craved for action. The opportunity now presenting itself served the purpose of oiling his rusty joints and honing his dulled senses. He braced himself, facing the second soldier. The sentry's stature was wildly exaggerated in the glare of the flickering crescent cuppix in his right fist. His eyes were wide open, in a slightly slanted, owlish glaze, enhanced in their sinister intensity by the hawk-bill curve of his nose, and pale. And pale is one word. And pale yellow peak of his cheeks. "Place your hands behind your back," said the second soldier as he raised his axe over his right shoulder blade and cast it a wavering glance. "We must bind your wrists to parry any attempts at escape. Be sure to make the knot a stout one, Broig." Broig? Broig, we wouldn't want our guest to take leave of our guidance. Broig, and that was seriously his name, grasped Grignr's left wrist and reached for the barbarian's right wrist. Grignr wrenched his right arm free and swiveled, I think that's spelled right, to face Broig, reaching beneath his loincloth. Wait, reach beneath? Reach beneath is hyphened. His loincloth with his right hand, the sentry grappled at his girdle for the sheathed dagger, but recoiled short of his intentions as Grignr's right arm swept to his gorge. The soldier went limp, his bobbing eyes rolling beneath fluttering eyelids, a deep welt across his spouting gullet. Without lingering to observe the result of his efforts, Grignr dropped to his knees. The second soldier's axe cleft over Grignr's head in a blaze. Think you mean blaze. of silvered ferocity, severing several scarlet locks from his scalp. Coming to rest in his fellow's stomach, the iron head crashed through mail and flesh with splintering force, spilling a pool of crimsoned entrails over the granite paving. Before the sentry could wrench his axe free from his comrade's carcass, he found Grignr's massive hands clasped about his throat, choking the life from his clamped lungs. With a zealous grunt, the accordion flexed his tightly corded biceps, forcing the grim-faced soldier to one knee. The sentry plunged his right fist into Grignr's face, digging his grimy nails into the barbarian's flesh. Ejaculating a curse through rasping teeth, Grignr, not capitalized, surged the bulk of his weight forward. Oh, I'm sorry, that doesn't say forward, it says forward. Rising to his feet, Grignr shook the blood. That's B-L-L-O-D. From his eyes, ruffling his surly red mane as a brush fire swaying to the nighttime breeze. I think somebody likes Grignr. Stooping over the sprawled. SPR and then sprawled. He started to type sprawled, and then sprawled. Okay. Fuck it. Whatever. Sprawled corpse of the first soldier, Grignr retrieved a small white object from a pool of congealing gore. Snorting a gusty billow of mirth, he once more concealed tiny. He's doing it again. So it's supposed to be the, but it's TH, and then an E, and then tiny. Tiny object beneath his loincloth, the tediously honed pelvis bone of the broken rodent. Returning his attention toward the second soldier, Grignr turned to the task of attiring his limbs. To move about freely through the dim recesses of the castle would require the grotesque garb of its soldiery. Utilizing the silence and stealth acquired in the untamed climes of his childhood, Grignr slunk? I don't know. Through twisting corridors and winding stairways, lighting his way with the confiscated torch of his dispatched guardian. Knowing where his steps were leading to, Grignr meandered aimlessly in search of an exit from the chateau's dim confines. The wild blood coursing through his veins yearned for the undefiled freedom of the livid wilderness lands. Coming upon a fork in the passage, he treeked. Oh, you mean trekked. Voices accompanied by clinking footfalls discerned to his sensitive ears from the left corridor. Wishing to avoid contact, Grignr veered to the right passageway. If acquiesced as to the purpose of his presence, his barbarous accent would reveal his identity, being that his attire was not that of the castle's mercenary troops. In grim silence, Grignr treaded down the dingily lit corridor, a stalking panther creeping warily along on padded feet. After an interminable period of wandering through the dull corridors, no gaps to break the monotony of the cold gray walls, Grignr espied? Descending the flight of Arst? Do you mean Arc? Descending the flight of arced granite slabs to their posterior, Grignr was confronted by a short hallway leading to a tall, arched wooden doorway. That's right, H-A-A-L-W-A-Y. Hallway. Halting before the teeming portal. You did it again, kid. Grignr rests, his shaggy head sideways against the barrier. Detecting no sounds from within, he grasped the looped metal handle of the door, his arms surging with a tremendous effort of bulging muscles, yet the door would not budge. Retrieving his axe from where he had sheathed it beneath his girdle, he hefted it in his mighty hands with an appeased grunt. I don't know if that's spelled right, but I think I get it. and wedging one of its blackened edges into the crack between the portal and its iron-rimmed sill. And, yeah, rimmed spelled correctly here. Bracing his sandaled right foot against the ruchuli. Kid, enough with these fucking typos. If you gotta take a break, take a break. Jesus. Roughly hewn wall, teeth tightly clenched, Grignr applevered the oaken haft, employing it as a lever whereby to pry open the barrier. The leather-wound hilt bending to its utmost limits of endurance, the massive portal swung open with a grating of snapped latch and rusty iron hinges. Just say door. It's a door. It's not a portal. It's a door. Glancing about the dust-swirled room in the gloomily dancing glare of his flickering cresset, Grignr eyed evidences of the enclosure being nothing more than a forgotten storeroom. Miscellaneous articles required for the maintenance of a castle were piled in disorganized heaps at infrequent intervals toward the wall opposite the barbarian's piercing stare. Utilizing long-bounding strides, Grignr paced his way over to the mounds of supplies to discover if any articles of value were contained within their midst. Detecting a faint clinking sound, Grignr sprawled to his left side with the speed of a striking cobra, landing harshly upon his back, torch and axe loudly clattering to the floor in a morass of sparks and flame. An elm-woven board, use an, leaped from collapsed flooring, clashing against the jagged flooring and spewing a shower of orange and yellow sparks over Grignr's startled face. Rising uneasily to his feet, the half-stunned accordion glared down at the gruesome arm of death he had unwittingly sprung. Mrifka! Once again, not sure about that. If not for his keen auditory organs and lightning-steeled... Oh, you mean lightning, but you said lighting-steeled reflexes. Grignr would have been groping through the shadowed hell pits of the Grim Reaper. He had unknowingly stumbled upon an ancient, long-forgotten booby trap. Forgotten. A mistake which would have stunted the perusal of longevity of one less agile. A mechanism similar in type to that of a miniature catapult was concealed beneath two collapsible sections of granite flooring. The arm of the device was 4 feet long, boasting razor-like cleats at regular intervals along its face with which it was to skewer the luckless body of its would-be victim. Grignr had stepped upon a concealed catch, which released... released a small metal latch beneath the 2 granite sections, causing them to fall inward, and thereby loose the spiked arm of death they precariously held in. Thank you for explaining how a trap works. Partially out of curiosity, and partially out of an inordinate fear of becoming a pincushion for a possible second trap, Grignr plunged his torch into the exposed gap in the floor. The floor of a second chamber stood out 7 feet below the glare. Tossing his torch through the aperture, Grignr grasped the side of an adjoining tile, dropping down. Glancing about the room, Grignr discovered that he had descended into the palace's mausoleum. Rectangular stone crypts cluttered the floor at evenly placed intervals. The tops of the enclosures were plated with thick layers of virgin gold, while the sides were plated with white ivory, at one time sparkling, but now grown dingy through the passage of the rays of all-encompassing Mother Time. Featured at the head of each sarcophagus in tarnished silver was an expungively, I don't know what that word is. carved likeness of its rotting inhabitant. A dingy atmosphere pervaded the air of the chamber, which, sealed in the enclosure for an unknown period, had grown thick and stale, which is what dingy means. Intermingling with the curdled currents was the repugnant stench of slowly moldering flesh, creeping ever slowly but surely through minute cracks in the numerous vaults. Due to the embalming of the bodies, their flesh decayed at a much slower rate than is normal, yet the nauseous odor was none the less repellent. Towering over Grignr's head was the trap he released. The mechanism of the miniaturized catapult was cluttered with mildews and cobwebs. Notwithstanding these relics of antiquity, its efficiency remained unimpinged. To the right of the trap wound a short stairway through a recess in the ceiling, a concealed entrance leading to the mausoleum for which the catapult had previously been erected as a silent, relentless guardian. Climbing up the side of the device, Grignr set to the task of resetting its mechanism. In the event that a search was organized, it would prove well to leave no evidence of his presence open to wandering eyes. Besides, it might even serve to dwindle the size of an opposing force. No shit. Descending from his perch, Grignr was startled by a faintly muffled scream of horrified desperation. His hair prickled yakishly in disorganized clumps along his scalp, as a cold danced along the length of his spinal cord. No moral/mortal barrier, human or otherwise, was capable of arousing the numbing sensation of fear inside of Grignr's smoldering soul. However, he was overwrought by the forces of the barbarian's instinctive fear of the supernatural. His mighty thews had always served to adequately conquer any tangible foe, but the intangible was somewhat distant and terrible. Dim, horrifying tales passed by word of mouth over the glimmering campfires and skins of wine had more than once served the purpose of chilling the marrowed core of his sturdy-limbed bones. We get it, he's a freightin'. Yet the scream contained a strangely human quality, unlike that which Grignr imagined would come from the lungs of a demon or spirit, making Grignr take short, nervous strides, advancing to the sarcophagus from which the sound was issuing. Clenching his teeth in an attempt to steel his jangled nerves, Grignr slid the engraved slab from the vault with a sharp rasp of grinding stone. Another long-drawn cry of terror-infested anguish met the barbarian, scoring like the shrill piping of a demented banshee, piercing the inner fibers of his superstitious brain with primitive dread, and awe. Once again, he wrote the same thing twice. Stooping over to espy the tomb's contents, the glittering accordion's nostrils were singled by the scorching aroma of a moldering corpse, long shut up and fermenting, the same putrid scent which permeated the entire chamber, though multiplied to a much more concentrated dosage. The shriveled, leathery packet of crumbling bones and dried, flacking flesh offered no resistance, but remained in a fixed position of perpetual vigilance, watching over its dim abode from hollow, gaping sockets. The tortured cries were not coming from the tomb, but from some hidden depth below. Pulling the reeking corpse from its resting place, Grignr tossed it to the floor in a broken, mangled heap. Upon one side of the crypt's bottom was attached a series of tiny hinges, while running parallel along the opposite side of a convex railing like protuberance, laid so as to appear as a part of the interior surface of the sarcophagus. Raising the slab upon its bronze hinges, long removed from the gaze of human eyes, Grignr perceived a scene which had caused his blood to smolder, not unlike bubbling molten lava. Directly below him, a whimpering female lay stretched upon a smooth-surfaced marble altar. A pack of greasy faced shaman. That's how you spelled it. Shaman clustered around her in a tight circular formation. Crouched over the girl was a tall, pot-bellied priest, his face dominated by a disgusting, open-mouthed grimace of sadistic glee. Suspended from the acolyte's clenched right hand was a carven, oval-faced mallet, which he waved menacingly over the girl's shadowed face, an incoherent gibberish flowing from his grinning, thick-lipped mouth. In the face of the amorphous, broad-breasted, female stretched out alluringly before his gaping eyes, the universal whim of nature filing, I guess, a plea of despair inside of his white-hot soul. Grignr acted in the only manner he could perceive, giving vent to a hoarse, throat-rending battle cry. Grignr plunged into the midst of the startled shaman, torch simmering in his left hand, and axe, one word, twirling in his right hand. A gaunt, skull-faced priest standing at the far side of the altar clutched desperately at his throat, coughing furiously in an attempt to catch his breath. Lurching helplessly to and fro, the acolyte pitched headlong against the gleaming base of a massive jade idol. Writhing agonizedly against the hideous image, foam flecked his chalk-white lips. The priest struggled helplessly, the victim of an epileptic seizure. Startled by the barbarian's stunning appearance, the chronic fit of their fellow, and the fear that Grignr might be the avant-garde of a conquering force dedicated to the cause of destroying their degenerated cult, the salmon, I think you mean shaman, momentarily lost their composure. Giving vent to heedless pandemonium, the priests fell easy prey to Grignr's sweeping arc of crimsoned death and maiming destruction. The acolyte performing the sacrifice took a vicious blow to the stomach, hands clutching vitals and severed spinal cord as he sprawled over the altar. The disorganized space where the G is supposed to go priests lurched and staggered with split skulls, dismembered limbs, and spewing entrails before the enraged accordion's relentless onslaught. The howls of the maimed and dying reverberated against the walls of the tiny chamber, a chorus of hell-fraught despair, as the granite floor ran red with blood. The entire chamber was encompassed in the heat of raw, savage butchery as Grignr luxuriated in the grips of a primitive, beastly bloodlust. Presently, all went silent, save for the ebbing groans of the sinking shaman and Grignr's heaving breath, accompanied by several gusty curses. The well had run dry. No more lambs remained for the slaughter. The rampaging steed of death, having taken of Grignr for the moment, left the barbarian free to the exploitation of his other perusals. Towering over his head was the misshapen image of the cult's hideous deity, Argon. The fantastic size of the idol in consideration of its being of pure jade was enough to cause the senses of any man to stagger and reel. Yet, thus was not the case for the behemoth. He had paid only casual notice to this incredible fact, while riveting the whole of his attention upon the jewel protruding from the idol's sole socket, its masterfully cut faucets emitting blinding rays of hypnotizing beauty. After all, a man cannot slink from a heavily guarded palace while burdened down by the intense bulk of a squatting statue, providing, of course, that the idol can even be hefted, which, in fact, was beyond the reaches of Grignr's coursing stamina. On the other hand, the jewel, gigantic as it was, would not present a hindrance of any mean concern.
"Help me, please. I can make it worth your while,"
pleaded a soft, anguish-strewn voice wafting over Grignr's shoulders as he plucked the dull red emerald from its roots. Turning, Grignr faced the female that had lured him into this bloodbath, but whom had become all but forgotten in the heat of the battle.
"You,"
ejaculated the accordion in a pleased tone. "I thought that I had seen the last of you at the tavern, but verily I was mistaken." Grignr advanced into the grips of the female's entrancing stare, severing the golden chains that held her captive upon the altar's highly polished face of ornamental limestone. As Grignr lifted the girl from the altar, her arms wound dexterously about his neck, soft and smooth against his harsh exterior.
"Art thou pleased that we have chanced to meet once again?"
Grignr merely voiced an aside grunt, returning the damsel's embrace while he smothered her trim, delicate lips between the coursing protrusions of his reeking maw. "Let us take leave of this wretched chamber," stated Grignr as he placed the female upon her feet. She swooned a moment, causing Grignr to give her that's a mess, support, then regained her stance. "Art thou able to find your way through the accursed passages of this castle? Marufka! Every one of the corridors of this damned place are identical."
I was at one time a slave of Prince Agaphim. I guess not to be confused with the other one. His clammy touch sent a sour swill through my belly, but my efforts reaped a harvest. I gained the pig's liking, whereby he allowed me the freedom of the palace. It was through this means that I eventually managed escape of the palace. It was a simple matter to seduce the sentry at the western gate. His trust found him with a dagger thrust his ribs," the wench stated whimsically. "What were you doing at the tavern, whence I discovered you?" asked Grignr as he lifted the female through the opening in the mausoleum. "I had sought to lay low from the palace's guards as they conducted their search for me. The tavern was seldom frequented by the palace guards, and my identity was unknown to the common soldiers. It was through the disturbance that you caused that the palace guards were attracted to the tavern. I was dragged away shortly after you were escorted to the palace."
"What are you called by, female?"
"Carthena, daughter of Mincardos, Duke of Barguigo, whose lands border..." "whose lands border along the northwestern fringes of Gorzum. I was paid as homage to Agaphim upon his 38th year."
"Husked the femme?" Why is there a exclamation point? "And I am called a barbarian," grunted Grignr in a disgusted tone.
The ways of your civilization are in many ways warped and distorted. But what is your calling?" she queried, bustily.
"Grignr of Ecordia."
I have heard vaguely of Ecordia. It is the hill country to the far east of the Norgolian Empire. I have also heard Agaphim curse your land more than once when his troops were routed in the unaccustomed mountains and gorges, saith she. God damn it.
My people are not tarnished by petty luxuries and baubles. They remain fierce and unconquerable in their native climes." After reaching the hidden panel at the head of the stairway, Grignr was at a loss in regard to its operation. His fiercest heaves were as pebbles against the burnished armor. Carthena depressed a small symbol included within the elaborate design upon the panel, where open? Whatever. It slowly slid into a cleft in the wall. "How did you come to be the victim of those crazed shaman?" quested Grignr as he escorted Carthena through the piles of rummage on the left side of the trap.
"By Agaphim's orders, I was thrust into a secluded cell to await his passing of sentence. By some means, the priests of Argon acquired a set of keys to the cell. They slew the guard placed over me and abducted me to the chamber in which you chanced to come upon the Skosistic? Kid, what the fuck? Sacrifice. Their hell-spawned cult demands a sacrifice once every 3 moons upon its full journey through the heavens. They were startled by your unannounced appearance through the fear that you had been sent by Agaphim. The prince would surely have submitted them to the most ghastly of tortures if he had ever discovered their unfaithfulness to Sargon, his bastard deity. Many of the partakers of the ritual were high nobles and high trustees of the inner palace. Agaphim's pitiless wrath would have been unparalleled.
"They have no more to fear of Agaphim now," bellowed Grignr in a deep, mirthful tone, a gleeful smirk upon his face. "I have seen that they were delivered from his vengeance." Engrossed by Carthena's graceful stride and conversation, Grignr failed to take note of the footfalls rapidly approaching behind him. As he swung aside the arched portal linking the chamber with the corridors beyond, a maddened, blood-lusting screech reverberated from his eardrums. Seemingly utilizing the speed of thought, Grignr swiveled to face his unknown foe. With gaping eyes and widened jaws, Grignr raised his axe above his surly mien. "Oh, you mean Maine." But he was too late. With wobbling knees and swimming head, the priest that had lapsed into an epileptic seizure rose unsteadily to his feet. While enacting his choking fit in writhing agony, the shaman was overlooked by Grignr. The barbarian had mistaken the seizure for the death throes of the acolyte, allowing the priest to avoid his stinging blade. The sight that met the priest's inflamed eyes nearly served to sprawl him upon the floor once more. The sacrificial Satit Grim. Satit Grim. What? Blood-splattered silence all around him, broken only by the occasional yelps and howls of his maimed and butchered fellows. Above his head rose the hideous idol, its empty socket holding the shaman's furbished, infuriated gaze. Well, kid's got a thesaurus, so who might argue? His eyes turned to a stony glaze with the realization of the pillage and blasphemy. Due to his high susceptibility, and I think that's spelled incorrectly, following the seizure, the priest was transformed into a raving maniac bent solely upon wreaking vengeance. With lips curled and quivering, a crust of foam dripping from them, the acolyte drew a long, wicked-looking jewel-hilted scimitar from his silver girdle and fled through the aperture in the ceiling, uttering a faintly perceptible ceremonial gibberish. A sweeping scimitar swung towards Grignr's head in a shadowed blur of motion. With axe raised over his head, Grignr prepared to parry the blow, while gaping wide-eyed, one word, in open-mouthed perplexity. Suddenly a sharp snap resounded behind the frothing shaman. The scimitar, halfway through its fatal sweep, dropped from a quivering, nerveless hand, clattering harmlessly to the stonage. Cutting a screech short with a bubbling red-mouthed gurgle, the lacerated acolyte staggered under the pressure of the released springboard. After a moment of helpless struggling, the shaman buckled, sprawling face down in a widening pool of blood, once again with 2 L's, and entrails, his regal purple robe blending enhancingly with the swirling streams of crimson. I got an idea. Every time he says crimson, take a drink. you'll die.
Marefka! I thought I had killed the last of those dogs,
muttered Grignr in a half-apathetic state.
Nay, Grignr, you doubtless grew careless while giving vent to your lusts, but let us not tarry any long, lest we overtax the fates. The paths leading to freedom will soon be barred. The wretch's cries must certainly have attracted unwanted attention,
the wench mused.
By what direction shall we pursue our flight?
Up that stair and down the corridor a short distance is the concealed entrance to a tunnel seldom used by others than the prince, and known to few others save the palace's royalty. It is used mainly by the prince when he wishes to take leave of the palace in secret. It is not always in the prince's best interests to leave his chateau in public eye. Even while under heavy guard, he is often assaulted by hurtling stones and rotting fruits. The commoners have little love for him.
Lectured the Nair lady? Why does that need to be shouted?
It is amazing that they would ever have left a pig like him to become their ruler. I should imagine that his people would rise up and crucify him like the dog he is.
Alas, Grignr, it is not as simple as all that. His soldiers are well paid by him. So long as he keeps their wages up, they will carry out his damned wish. The crude implements of the common folk would never stand up under an onslaught of forged blades and protective armor. They would be going to their own slaughter,
stated Carthena to a confused but angered Grignr as they topped the stairway. Confused and angry seems to be the only two emotions he has.
Yet how can they bear to live under such oppression? I would sooner die beneath the sword than live under such a dog's command,
added Grignr as the pair stalked down the hall in the direct opposite that in which Grignr had come. Because that's how that works. Duh.
But all men are not of the same mold that you are born of. They choose to live as they are, so as to save their filthy necks from the chopping block,
returned Carthena in a disgusted tone as she cast an appeased glance towards the stalwart figure at her side, whose left arm was wound dexterously about her slim waist. Dexterously? His slowly waning torch casting their images in intermingling wisps as it dangled from his left hand. So he's holding her and a torch? That doesn't sound safe. Presently, Carthena came upon the panel, concealed amongst, because there's no G, the other granite slabs, and discernible only by the burnt-out cresset above it.
As I push the cresset aside, push the panel inwards.
Carthena motioned to the panel she was referring to, and twisted the cresset in a counterclockwise motion. Grignr braced his right shoulder against the walling, concentrating the force of his bulk against it. The slab gradually swung inward with a slight grating sound. Carthena stooped beneath Grignr's corded arms and crawled upon all fours into the passage beyond. Grignr followed after easing the slab back into place. Winding before the pair was a dark, musty tunnel, exhibiting tangled spiderwebs from its ceiling to wall, and an oozing, sickly slime running lazily upon its floor. Hanging from the chipped wall upon Grignr's, because the G and the R are capitalized, right side was a half-moldered corpse. Moldered? Its gray, flacking arms held in place by rusted iron manacles. Carthena flinched back into Grignr's arms at sight of the leering, set in an ugly, distorted grimace, staring horribly at her from hollow, gaping sockets. Once again, this is redundant.
This alcove must have been used by Agaphim as a torture chamber. I wonder how many of his enemies have disappeared into these haunts, never to be heard from again, pondered the hulking brute.
Let us flee before we are also caught within Agaphim's ghastly clutches. The exit from this tunnel cannot be very far from here,
said Carthena with a slight sob to her voice as she sagged in Grignr's encompassing embrace.
Aye, it will be best to be finished with this corridor as soon as it is possible. But why do you flinch from the sight of death so? You have seen much death this day without exhibiting such emotions, exclaimed Grignr as he led her trembling form along the dingy confines. I think he meant from.
The man hanging from the wall was Doyanta.
Doyanta. Let's just go with that.
He had committed the folly of showing affections for me in front of Agaphim. He never meant any harm by his actions.
At this, Carthena broke into a slow, steady whimpering, choking her voice with gasping sobs. Can't even spell choking.
There was never anything between us, yet Agaphim did this to him. The beast! May the demons of hell's deepest haunts claw away at his wretched flesh for this merciless act, she prayed.
I detect that you felt more for this fellow than you wish to let on. But enough of this. We can talk of such matters after we are once more free to do so.
With this, Grignr lifted the grieved female to her feet and strode onward down the corridor, supporting the bulk of her weight with his surging left arm, which is still holding a torch. Presently, a dim light was perceptibly filtering into the tunnel, casting a dim, reddish hue upon the moldy wall of the passage's grim confines. Carthena had ceased her whimpering and partially regained her composure.
The tunnel's end must be nearing. Rays of sunlight are beginning to seep into.
Grignr claimed, his right hand over Carthena's mouth, and with a slight struggle pulled her over to the shadows at the right-hand wall of the path, while at the same time thrusting this torch beneath an overhanging stone to smother its flickering rays.
Be silent. I can hear footfalls approaching through the tunnel,
growled Grignr in a hushed tone.
All that you hear are the horses corralled at the far end of the tunnel. That is a further sign that we are nearing our goal, she stated, with an exclamation point.
All that you hear is less than I hear. I heard footsteps coming toward us. Silence yourself that we may find out whom we are being brought into contact with. I doubt that any would have thought as yet of searching this passage for us. The advantage of surprise will be on our side, Grignr warned, and surprise is spelled with a Z. Carthena cast her eyes downward and ceased any further pursuit towards conversation, an irritating habit in which she had gained an amazing proficiency. Yeah, that's right, shut up, lady. Show us your boobs. Two figures came into the pair's view from around a turn in the tunnel. They were clothed in rich, luxuriant silks, and rambling on, in conversation while ignorant of their crouching foes, waiting in an ambush ahead.
That barbarian dog is cringing beneath the weight of the lash at this moment, sire. He shall cause no more disturbance.
Aye, and so it is with any who dare to cross the path of Sargon's chosen one,
said the second man.
But the peasants are showing signs of growing unrest. They complain that they cannot feed their families while burdened with your taxes. Feed their families. Yeah, I said that.
I shall teach those sluts the meaning of humility. Order an immediate increase upon their taxes. They dare to question my sovereign authority? Ha! They shall soon learn what true oppression can be. I will...
A showdoad bulk leapt from behind a jutting promontory as it brought down a double-edged axe with the spibid of a striking thought. One of the nobles sagged lifeless to the ground, skull split to the teeth. Grignr gasped as he observed the bisected face set in its leering death agonies. It was Agaphim! The dead man's comrade, having recovered from his shock, drew a jewel-encrusted dagger from beneath the folds of his robe and lunged toward the barbarian's back. Grignr spun at the sound from behind and smashed down his crimsoned axe once more. His antagonist lunged, howling, to a stream of stagnant green water, grasping a spouting stump that had once been a wrist. Grignr raised his axe over his head and prepared to finish the incomplete job, but was deterred halfway through his lunge by a frenzied screech from behind. Carthena leapt to the head of the writhing figure, plunging a smoldering torch into the agonized face. The howls increased in their horrid intensity, stifled by the sizzling of roasting flesh, then died down until the man was reduced to a blubbering mass of squirming, insensate flesh? Oh, fuck off, kid. Grignr advanced to Carthena's side, wincing slightly from the putrid aroma of charred flesh that rose in a puff of thick white smog throughout the chamber. Carthena reeled slightly, staring dazedly downward at her gruesome handiwork.
I had to do it. It was Agaphim. I had to,
she exclaimed. Sargon should be more careful of his right-hand men, added Grignr, a smug grin upon his lips. But to hell with Sargon now. The stench is becoming bothersome to me. No shit. With that, Grignr grasped Carthena around the waist, leading her around the bend in the cave and into the open. A ball of feral red was rising through the mists of the eastern horizon, dissipating the slinking shadows of the night. A corral stood before the pair, enclosing 2 grazing mares. Grignr reached into a weighted-down leather pouch dangling at his side, and drew forth the scintillant red emerald he had obtained from the bloated idol. Raising it toward the sun, he said, "We shall do well with bauble, eh?" Carthena gaped at the gem, gasping in a terrified manner.
"The Eye of Argon! Oh, Kala!"
At this, the gem gave off a blinding glow, then dribbled through Grignr's fingers in a slimy red ooze. Grignr stepped back, pushing Carthena behind him. The droplets of slime slowly converged into a pulsating jelly-like mass. A single opening transfixed the blob. Forming into a leech-like maw. Then the hideous transgressor of nature flowed towards Grignr, a trail of greenish slime lingering behind it. The single gap puckered repeatedly, emitting a ghastly sucking sound. Grignr spread his legs into a battle stance, steeling his quivering thews for a battle royale with a thing he knew not how to fight. Carthena wound her arms about her protector's neck, mumbling, "Kill it! Kill!" while her entire body trembled. Feminist of the year, folks. The thing was almost upon Grignr when he buried his axe into the grisly maw. It passed through the glob and clanged upon the ground. Grignr drew his axe back with a film of yellow-green slime clinging to the blade. The thing was seemingly unaffected. Then it started to sluice up his leg. The hairs upon his nape stood on end from the slimy feel of the thing's bully bulk. The nauseous, spelled very incorrectly, sucking sound became louder, and Grignr felt the blood being drawn from his body. With each hiss of hideous pucker, the thing increased in size. Grignr shook his foot about madly in an attempt. Get it off! Get it off! Oh, God. Grignr shook his foot about madly in an attempt to dislodge the blob, but it clung like a leech, still feeding upon his rapidly draining life fluid. Once again, he can't just say blood. He grasped, with his hands trying to rip it off, but only found his hands entangled in a sickly glue-like substance. The slimy thing continued its puckering, now having grown the size of Grignr's leg from its vampiric feast. Grignr began to reel and stagger under the blob, his chalk-white face and faltering muscles attesting to the gigantic loss of blood. Carthena slipped from Grignr in a death-like faint, a marrow-chilling scream upon her red, rubish lips. In final desperation, Grignr grasped the smoldering torch upon the ground and plunged it into the reeking maw of the travesty. A shudder passed through the thing. Grignr felt the blackness closing upon his eyes, but held on with the last ebb of his rapidly waning vitality. He could feel its grip lessening as a hideous gurgling sound erupted from the writhing maw. The jelly-like mass began to bubble like a vat of boiling tar as quivers passed up and down its entire form. With a sloshing plop, the thing fell to the ground, evaporating in a thick scarlet cloud until it reattained its original size. It remained thus for a moment as the puckered maw took the shape of a protruding red eyeball, the pupil of which seemed to unravel before it the tale of creation. How a shapeless mass slithered from the quagmires of the stigmatic pool of time, only to degenerate into a leprosy of avaricious lust. In that fleeting moment, the grim mystery of life was revealed before Grignr's ensnared gaze. The eyeball's glare turned to a sudden plea of mercy, a plea for the whole of humanity. Then the blob began to quiver with violent convulsions. The eyeball shattered into 1,000 tiny fragments and evaporated in a curling wisp of scarlet mist. The very ground below the thing began to vibrate and swallow it up with a belch. The thing was gone forever. All that remained was a dark red blotch upon the face of the earth, blotching things up. Shaking his head, his shaggy mane to clear the jumbled fragments of his mind, Grignr tossed the limp female over his shoulder, mounting one of the disgruntled mares, and leading the other. The weary, scarred barbarian trooted slowly off into the horizon to become a tiny pinpoint in a filtered, filed, swirling blue mists. I think he meant filtered field? Okay. Leaving the nobles, soldiers, and peasants to replace the missing monarch. Long live the king! Couldn't even get the last line right, could you, Jim? Well, that's enough of that.